I used to think betrayal would announce itself loudly. A scream, a slammed door, a confession that cracked the room in half. Instead, it arrived quietly, through a phone charging on the bathroom counter, lighting up the dark with a name I didn't recognize. And by the time I realized what that glow meant, my marriage was already over. My name is Emily Carter. I was 32 years old when my husband decided that our life, our home, our vows, our 7-year-old daughter were things he could walk away from because, in his words, kids are resilient. That sentence still echoes in my head some nights. Resilient. Like our daughter, Peyton was a piece of furniture that wouldn't notice if someone moved it out of the room. Like love could be abandoned without consequence, as long as the person leaving convinced himself it wouldn't hurt too much. What makes this story harder to tell isn't just the affair, it's who he chose. For years, my husband Troy had warned everyone about her, called her unstable, toxic, a walking disaster. He said she nearly destroyed his brother's life and that our family was better off without her anywhere near us. And then, without hesitation, he took our shared savings, booked flights, bought jewelry, and built a new life with that same woman behind my back. The woman he once said was poison. I didn't fight him when he left. I didn't beg him to stay. I didn't chase answers or scream or throw anything. I sat at our kitchen table with his phone in front of me, felt my hands go cold, and understood in a single breath that the man I married was already gone. What followed wasn't dramatic in the way movies like to show betrayal. It was quieter, crueler, longer. It was explaining absence to a child who kept asking when her father was coming home. It was watching his family choose sides without hesitation. It was realizing that sometimes the worst betrayals don't come with anger, but with relief on the face of the person walking away. And this is the story of how everything he chased destroyed him, and how the family he abandoned didn't disappear. They stayed. I'm 32 now, but the version of me who first met Troy Bennett in college feels like someone I used to know, like an old photo tucked in a drawer. Same face, same name, but not the same certainty. We met during our second year in a crowded lecture hall that always smelled faintly of coffee and printer paper. I was the girl who sat near the aisle, notebook perfectly aligned, pen cap always on the back end like I'd been taught. Troy was the guy who never seemed fully seated, one foot bouncing, eyes darting, already halfway into whatever came next. He had this electricity about him, not the loud, attention-seeking kind, more like a current you could feel when he walked into a room. He'd talk about the next big project, the next job opportunity, the next trip he wanted to take, before life got boring. People leaned toward him when he spoke. Even professors gave him that extra second of patience, like they could sense he wasn't trying to be difficult, just restless. When he started talking to me, I mistook that restlessness for passion. I remember the first real conversation we had. We were walking out of class, and he glanced at my notes, neat headings, color-coded highlights, and laughed softly. You're like, organized in a way that makes me feel both impressed and personally attacked, he joked. I smiled, a little guarded. Some of us like knowing where the ground is. He looked at me then, really looked. Yeah, he said, like he understood something important. I think I need someone like that. At the time, I heard it as a compliment, like I could be the balance to his energy, like we'd make each other better. And for a while, we did. We dated through late-night study sessions and cheap takeout dinners, through finals weeks where he'd drag me out for a midnight drive just to clear our heads. He'd reach for my hand at stoplights and tell me, with complete sincerity, that he felt like he could breathe when he was with me. I believed him. Then, 2 years before I met Troy, my life had already cracked in a way I didn't talk about much. I was 24 when my parents died in a car accident. No warning, no last conversation, no chance to prepare myself for the silence that comes after two people who've always been there suddenly aren't. I didn't have siblings, no built-in person to share grief with, no one who remembered our childhood the exact same way. For months, I moved through my days like I was underwater, smiling when I was supposed to, answering questions like I was fine, then collapsing into tears in the privacy of my apartment where no one could hear. Troy didn't save me. I want to be clear about that. But he gave me something I didn't realize I was missing, a sense that life could still move forward, even with loss inside it. When we got serious, Troy brought me home to meet his family. And that's when something shifted, because his parents, Brianna Bennett, 62, warm and expressive, the kind of woman who touched your arm when she spoke, and Johan Bennett, 64, quieter but steady, welcomed me like I belonged. Brianna hugged me the first time I walked into their house, held on long enough that my throat tightened, and whispered, "We're so happy you're here." happy you're. Johann shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "Any woman who makes Troy slow down enough to eat dinner at a table is welcome in my home." I laughed, but it hit deeper than humor, because after losing my parents, home had felt like a place that no longer existed. And suddenly, Troy's family, his holiday traditions, the way Johann grilled even in winter, the way Brianna insisted on sending leftovers home, started filling that empty space. Troy had an older brother, Thomas Bennett, 37 now, and he was the opposite of Troy in almost every way. Thomas was steady, quiet competence, the kind of man who showed up early, stayed late, and didn't need applause for it. He worked at the family construction supply business with Johann, and people respected him because he didn't talk about loyalty. He lived it. I remember noticing it in small ways. Thomas would refill someone's drink without being asked. He'd fix a loose cabinet hinge at his parents' house while everyone else chatted. He'd listen more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was measured, like he believed words should cost something. Troy, in contrast, was always looking outward. New jobs, new challenges, new scenery. After we got married, that trait didn't disappear. It became the foundation of our life together, the story he told about himself. In the first 5 years of our marriage, Troy switched jobs 3 times. Each time, he'd pitch it like it was an upgrade, not just in pay or title, but in meaning. "This one will challenge me more," he'd say, pacing the living room with his phone in hand. "This one is finally the right fit." And I'd be the one nodding, calculating budgets, adjusting schedules, making it work. Not because he forced me, because I loved him, because I wanted to believe that marriage was teamwork, that supporting someone's ambition didn't mean sacrificing your own stability. It meant building a bigger future together. We had Peyton after we'd been married a few years. And for a while, Troy did try. He'd rock her to sleep when she was a baby, humming off key under his breath. He'd take pictures of her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb. He'd tell Brianna, half proud and half stunned, "I didn't know I could love someone this much." Sometimes I replay those memories like a cruel joke, because the man who once whispered love into a newborn's hair would later look me in the eye and say our daughter would be fine without him. But I didn't see that ending back then. Back then, I saw a family that finally felt like mine. I saw a husband who made me feel chosen. And I saw small warning signs I ignored, not because I was naive, but because I wanted so badly for the story to stay beautiful. One of those warning signs had a name: Bailey Richardson. Thomas dated her about 3 years ago. She was 33, loud in a way that took up space. The kind of woman who made every room orbit her mood. I didn't know her well. Mostly family gatherings, small conversations, but she always felt like a storm looking for a place to land. And Troy hated her. Not casually, not politely. He hated her with this righteous anger, like she represented everything he despised. "She thrives on chaos," he'd say after she left a family dinner. "Thomas is better off without her." At the time, I agreed. Everyone did. Because the last family event she attended ended in humiliation. It was Johann's birthday barbecue. Smoke curling from the grill, people laughing, Peyton toddling around with a juice box, Brianna glowing because her whole family was together. And then Bailey snapped. Accused Thomas of ignoring her, of being boring, of not showing her off. Thomas tried to calm her down quietly, his shoulders tense but his voice controlled. Bailey didn't want calm. She wanted spectacle. She threw a drink at him, right there in front of everyone, ice and liquid splashing across his shirt, his face, his pride. Then she stormed out, screaming that he'd die alone. Thomas didn't chase her. He just stood there, soaked and humiliated, while the rest of us froze in that awkward, stunned silence that follows someone else's public explosion. Troy was furious that night. He paced the backyard like a man ready to fight the air itself. "She's toxic," he kept saying. "She's a train wreck. Thomas dodged a bullet." I remember Troy's jaw clenched as he said it, the way his hands flexed like he wanted to grab the situation and crush it into something simple. I remember thinking, he would never let someone like that near our family again. I remember believing him, and maybe that's the cruelest part. Because when everything fell apart later, it wasn't Bailey who shocked me the most. It was Troy, the man who called her poison, eventually drank her anyway. If I look back now, really let myself be honest, the shift didn't happen all at once. It seeped in. Quiet, gradual, easy to explain away if you didn't want to see it. About 6 months before everything blew up, Troy started coming home later than usual. At first, it didn't register as a problem. He was a project manager at a construction firm, and irregular hours were part of the job. Deadlines moved. Clients demanded attention at inconvenient times. I'd lived with that rhythm for years. But this felt different. He stopped unwinding in the living room after work. No kicking off his shoes, no half listening to Peyton talk about school while scrolling on his phone. Instead, he'd come in, kiss the top of my head, murmur something about needing to finish a call, and disappear into the bedroom with his laptop. The door would close. Not slammed, just shut. I'd sit at the kitchen table, the hum of the dishwasher filling the silence, and tell myself not to overthink it. People needed privacy sometimes. Work was stressful. Marriage didn't mean constant proximity. Still, the small things began to stack. Weekend work became routine. Saturday mornings, he'd grab his keys before breakfast, saying clients demanded consultations outside regular hours. Sunday evenings, he'd return exhausted, distant, already mentally somewhere else. When I asked how the meetings went, he'd give vague answers. Productive. Long. You wouldn't be interested. That last one stung more than it should have. I tried not to accuse, tried not to sound suspicious. Instead, I did what I always did when something felt off in our marriage. I worked harder. I cooked his favorite meals, the ones that took time, the ones that filled the house with familiar smells, like proof of effort. I left notes in his work bag, little reminders that someone was still rooting for him. I suggested date nights. Let's get a babysitter, I said one evening while folding laundry. Just dinner. We haven't done that in months. He smiled, that easy, charming smile that used to undo me completely. That sounds great, he said. Let's do it next week. Next week came and went. Something came up at work. Then the following week, and the one after that. Each cancellation came with an apology. Each apology sounded rehearsed, like something he'd practiced saying to himself long before he said it to me. I started feeling like I was pouring energy into a bucket with a hole in the bottom. And the worst part was the silence around it. No fights, no raised voices, no obvious wrongdoing. Just absence. He stopped asking about my day. Stopped noticing when I cut my hair. Stopped sitting beside me on the couch. Choosing instead to perch at the far end, phone angled away like it held something fragile. Sometimes I'd catch him smiling at a message. Not laughing, not openly amused. Just softened. When I asked who it was, he'd say a coworker, a client, a group chat. Always plausible, always just believable enough. His family noticed too. Brianna asked me once quietly while Peyton colored at the table, "Is Troy doing okay? He seems distracted lately." I defended him automatically. Work's been intense. Johan nodded, but his eyes lingered on me longer than necessary, like he wasn't fully convinced. Thomas said nothing. He never did. But I noticed the way he watched Troy during family dinners. The way his jaw tightened when Troy checked his phone mid-conversation. The way his patience thinned when Troy showed up late, again, to help with something he'd promised. I started replaying old conversations in my head, little moments that felt different now. Times Troy talked about feeling boxed in, about how life wasn't supposed to feel repetitive, about how people changed, and sometimes relationships didn't evolve fast enough to keep up. At the time, I thought he was talking about work. Now I wonder if he was talking about me, about us. There was one night that stands out, a memory that feels heavier now than it did then. We were in bed, lights off, Peyton asleep down the hall. I rolled toward him, rested my head against his shoulder. His body tensed, just slightly. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quickly. Too quickly. Just tired. I stayed quiet for a moment, listening to his breathing. "You know you can talk to me, right?" I said, "if something's bothering you." He didn't answer right away. Then he sighed. "I just feel like I'm always needed. At work, at home, everywhere." The words weren't cruel, but they landed like a warning. I pulled back, propped myself on my elbow. "We're a family. That's kind of how it works." "I know," he said. "I'm not saying it's bad. Just heavy sometimes." I didn't push. I should have. But I was afraid that if I did, I'd hear something I couldn't unhear. So I let the silence stretch. Let the distance grow. Let the seed take root. By the time I noticed how deep it had gone, it was already breaking the surface. The moment I found the messages on his phone felt like the ground disappearing beneath me. I had been doing laundry, folding Peyton's clothes, stacking them neatly in her drawer when his phone lit up on the bathroom counter. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't trying to invade his privacy. But the name that flashed across the screen made my stomach drop. Natalie. I didn't recognize it immediately, but something inside me flared with a quiet alarm. Something about the way the name sat there on his phone. I couldn't shake the feeling. I told myself it was nothing. But when the next message popped up, I saw the words, "Missing you, can't wait to see you again." And something inside me broke. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling. I knew it was wrong. I knew I shouldn't read further, but it felt like the only thing keeping me grounded was seeing the truth. What I found wasn't just a few texts, it was a history. Flirty messages, plans to meet, photos I can't even bring myself to describe here. And then, at the bottom of the thread, I saw the name again, Bailey Natalie Richardson. Bailey, the same woman Troy had called toxic, the one he'd raged about when his brother had dated her, the one who had almost ruined Thomas, according to Troy's words. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I'd known there was something wrong, had felt the shift for months, but this was a gut punch that I wasn't prepared for. I wasn't just angry or hurt, I was betrayed. I tried to keep my composure as I placed the phone back where I found it. I didn't want Peyton to hear me or see my face. She had been so excited about the upcoming weekend, and I didn't want her to sense the storm I was feeling brewing inside me. That night, when Troy came home, I was already sitting at the kitchen table. The phone was in front of me, the text glowing in the dim kitchen light. He walked in, took one look at my face, and immediately knew. He didn't even try to deny it. He sat down across from me, his face pale. "I was going to tell you," he said, as if it was a casual conversation about his new hobby, not an affair that had shattered the foundation of our family. "You were going to tell me?" I repeated, feeling the disbelief seeping through every word. "How long? How long has this been going on, Troy?" 4 months, he said quietly. I didn't plan for it to happen. I ran into Bailey at a coffee shop and we talked. It just happened." My mind went blank. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. We talked? I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. But all I could do was stare at him, waiting for him to continue. "You really think I'm stupid enough to believe that?" I asked, my voice trembling, despite my best effort to control it. "How long, Troy? How long have you been lying to me?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, he looked at me, his face almost apologetic. "We've been talking for months. We reconnected. I felt something. I didn't want to hurt you." "I'm not the one you're hurting, am I?" My voice broke on the words. The rage started to burn through me. How could he think he could break me like this and offer excuses? I asked him about Thomas, his brother, the man he had so fervently despised because of Bailey's toxicity. Troy shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. "That was years ago," he said, voice defensive. "People change." I let out a harsh laugh. "You think that's what this is? People changing? You're betraying not just me, but your own brother, your family, and you think it's just about chemistry?" He was quiet for a moment, his eyes flicking to the side, his hands clenched on the table. "I've been unhappy for a while, Emily. I feel trapped. I don't want to live like this anymore." I stared at him, feeling the breath in my chest catch. "Trapped?" The word kept echoing in my mind. "Do you even care that we're a family? That Peyton, your daughter, is sitting at home waiting for you while you destroy everything?" I asked him again, voice hoarse. "Is this over? Do you want to fix this or is it done?" He didn't answer right away, but his face softened, like he had been waiting for that moment, a sign that he could finally admit what he wanted. "I need to be honest," he said. "I'm not happy. I haven't been for a while. I want to explore something else before it's too late." The words dropped in the space between us like a heavy stone. "Too late?" I stood up suddenly. "Then get out." His eyes widened. "What?" I said, "Pack your things and leave," I repeated, my voice trembling with the weight of something heavier than just disappointment. Troy looked at me, his face pale. For a moment, I thought he might argue. He didn't. He stood up slowly, the tension between us palpable, and walked upstairs. I didn't hear him pack, but I could feel my heart break again with every minute that passed. When he returned, it was with a duffel bag, one that hadn't been there earlier in the day. He didn't look at Peyton's picture on the fridge as he grabbed his things. He didn't even say goodbye to her. And when he left, I thought I'd feel relief. But all I felt was emptiness. The house felt too quiet after Troy left. It was the kind of silence that could swallow you whole, but still not erase the echo of his footsteps. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the remnants of a meal I had made for him that he would never taste. The leftover chicken, untouched potatoes, and the half-empty bottle of wine felt like cruel reminders of the person who had once said he wanted to build a life with me, only to destroy it without a second thought. Peyton wasn't home that night. I was grateful for that. She was at a sleepover, unaware that her entire world had just collapsed. I didn't want her to see me like this, not yet, not until I could figure out how to explain it all. I went through the motions, cleaning the kitchen, folding laundry, anything to keep myself busy and distracted. The house felt too big, the walls too close. I hated the way everything I touched seemed to amplify the reality I didn't want to face. I went upstairs, unable to resist the urge to look through his things. I knew I shouldn't, but something in me needed answers. Needed to understand how long he'd been planning this. I needed something, anything, to make sense of what had just happened. His clothes were already gone. His things were already packed away in a few hastily thrown together bags. But there were things left behind, little reminders of a life I no longer recognized. A photograph from our last vacation, Peyton smiling, me and Troy grinning beside her, sat on the dresser, the edges slightly curled. I picked it up, my fingers trembling, and for a brief second I saw our old selves, the family we used to be, happy, hopeful, together. Then, just like that, the memory felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. I dropped the picture back on the dresser and turned away. The house was suffocating. I needed air. I stepped outside into the cool night, the stars glittering above, and leaned against the railing of the porch. I breathed deeply, trying to shake the tightness in my chest. I couldn't process it all. It was too much. I kept thinking about how Troy had said kids are resilient, how he'd brushed off the weight of his decision like it wouldn't scar our daughter, like his absence wouldn't leave a hole in her heart. Was that how little he understood? I felt the sting of that moment deep in my bones. And that's when the tears finally came. I didn't sob or wail. It wasn't that kind of cry. It was quiet, an aching release, like all the emotions I had stuffed down for the past few months broke free in an instant. There were so many things I wanted to say to Troy in that moment. So many things I wanted to scream. But there was no point. The truth was staring me in the face now. He was gone. There would be no more chances for us to fix things, no more talking through our problems. His words about feeling trapped echoed in my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder if he had used those words to justify his own escape from everything we had built. Was this all about him trying to find something new, something exciting, something he thought would make him feel alive again? What about me? What about Peyton? I wiped my face with the back of my hand and took a deep breath, steadying myself. I was done crying over him. I wouldn't let him take everything. I wouldn't let him steal my peace, my strength, or my daughter's happiness. We had been through too much already, together, alone, and now, in this moment of betrayal, I was going to find a way to move forward without him. But there was no denying the reality of what had just happened. The man I had married, the man who had promised to be there for me, for Peyton, had chosen a different life, and in doing so, had shattered everything. When Peyton came home the next day, I knew I would have to answer her questions, but I didn't have the strength to explain it all yet. I didn't know how to say the words aloud without falling apart again. She came in, excited from her sleepover, talking about her friends and the games they played. But the moment she saw my face, my red eyes, the exhaustion in every line of my body, she stopped. "Mom," she asked quietly, "what's wrong?" Her voice made my heart ache, because how do you explain betrayal to a child? How do you make sense of something so cruel when all she wants is to feel safe? I swallowed hard and smiled, trying to make it look genuine. "Nothing, sweetie," I said, even though everything felt like it was falling apart. "Just a little tired." Peyton seemed to buy it. She grabbed my hand and dragged me to the living room to watch a movie with her. We settled on the couch, her small body pressed against mine, and for a few minutes, the world outside seemed to fade. But as I sat there, I knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter. One where I would have to rebuild from the ground up. One where I would have to learn to trust myself again, to trust the decisions I had made and the life I wanted to create for Peyton and me. But it wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. And Troy, he would never know just how much strength it would take for me to stand up again. The days that followed felt like walking through fog. I tried to focus on the routines Peyton and I had built together, the little things that gave me a sense of normalcy, the after-school snacks, the nightly bedtime stories, the trips to the park on weekends. But even as I smiled at her, kissed her goodnight, and tucked her into bed, something gnawed at me. The reality that the foundation I'd built my life on had been cracked wide open, and I wasn't sure how to fix it. It didn't help that Troy's family kept calling, coming by, trying to help. Brianna and Johan, in their own ways, had always treated me like a daughter. They were the parents I had lost when mine died, and even after everything that had happened with Troy, they still held that place in my heart. But now, they seemed lost too. They didn't know how to fix this, how to put the pieces of their son's life back together. I could see it in their eyes. Brianna cried when she first called. "We never thought it would come to this, Emily. I'm so sorry." I didn't know what to say to her, so I said nothing. Her apologies felt hollow, like they were meant for Troy, not me. And I didn't want her to apologize for his choices. It wasn't her fault. A few days later, Johann showed up on my doorstep. His face looked older somehow, like the weight of everything was finally starting to break through the hard exterior he'd built over the years. He had always been the silent strength of the family, the one who kept things steady, kept everyone grounded. Now, he looked like he was searching for answers he couldn't find. "I'm sorry for all of this," he said, standing at the door with his hands in his pockets, unsure if he should come in. "You know, your mother-in-law and I never thought Troy would do something like this. I don't know what went wrong." I nodded, letting the silence settle between us. I could feel the weight of his words, the sadness in his voice, but I didn't know how to comfort him. After everything that had happened, I didn't have any words to make it better. "I'm just trying to figure out what's next," I said quietly. "For me, for Peyton, I can't keep living in this limbo." He looked at me for a long moment, like he was searching for something to say, something to fix it. But there was nothing. I appreciated the effort, but his presence only reminded me of how broken everything had become. It wasn't about apologies anymore. It was about moving on, about surviving, about not letting Troy's choices destroy me or Peyton any more than they already had. "I'll do what I can to help," Johann said finally, his voice full of regret. "But you know this is hard for us too. Troy's our son. We can't just turn our backs on him." I stared at him for a second, feeling a strange mix of anger and sympathy. The same man who had raised Troy was standing here, telling me he couldn't turn his back on his son. And I understood that. I did. But he wasn't the one left with the wreckage of Troy's decisions. "I don't need your help to fix Troy," I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. "I need your help to make sure Peyton doesn't grow up thinking that's what love looks like." Johann's face softened. He didn't say anything after that. He just nodded and walked away, leaving me to handle the mess alone. But it wasn't just his family that was involved now. Troy had managed to bring his chaos into every corner of my life, leaving his fingerprints on everything I touched. My phone started to buzz more frequently, the messages coming in from his old friends, mutual acquaintances, and even some of his coworkers, all of them with the same words. "Are you okay? We're here for you." I didn't want their pity. I didn't want anyone's sympathy. What I needed was a life that was mine again, a life where I could take control, where I wasn't constantly reminded of the man who had just walked out of it. And then things started to escalate. It began with the messages from Troy. At first, I ignored them. Then they became impossible to ignore. Every night, there would be a text or two, always at odd hours, almost like he was trying to get me to crack. At first, it was simple. He'd ask about Peyton. He'd say he missed her. Then it got more desperate, more pleading. "Emily, I've made a huge mistake. I need to talk. I want to fix this. I know I've hurt you, but I love you, and I miss my family." The texts were long, rambling, filled with regret, with promises of change that I didn't believe for a second. And then one night, I got the one message that crossed the line. "I'll always be here for you. I'm sorry for everything. But we can still make this work. We just have to try again." I sat on the couch reading those words over and over. It was like being punched in the gut. After everything he'd done, after everything he'd taken from me, he was still trying to manipulate me into believing that he could somehow come back, like nothing had happened. I was furious, more furious than I'd ever been before. The next morning, I packed up the rest of his things. The clothes, the books, the photos. I threw it all into boxes, then dragged it to the curb. I didn't care anymore. I didn't need him. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let him come back in to try and fix something that he had already destroyed. The world around me was crumbling. But in that moment, I felt a shift. I was done. I was done pretending that this was just a bump in the road, done pretending that this was something that could be fixed. I was ready to walk away completely. I didn't look back when I shut the door on his things, or when the boxes sat in front of the house. I didn't care if anyone thought I was being harsh. I wasn't going to wait for him to decide what he wanted anymore. I would be the one to decide what we needed. The hardest part of all of this wasn't the anger. It wasn't the texts, the phone calls, or even the things I found when I went through our finances. It wasn't the betrayal from Troy, or the shock of seeing him walk away from us without a second thought. It was the loneliness, the crushing, suffocating loneliness that hit me like a wave the moment I shut the door on his things and realized that everything had changed. Troy wasn't just gone. He had taken the life we built together with him. He had taken my trust, my stability, and my belief that love was something that could be counted on. He had taken Peyton's innocence, her belief that we were a family, that we were safe. I woke up the next morning with the weight of that truth pressing down on me. Peyton was still sleeping in her room, blissfully unaware of the chaos that had consumed her world. I was grateful for that. But it didn't stop the knot in my stomach, the tightness in my chest that seemed to grow with each passing hour. It wasn't just the absence of Troy, it was the empty space he left behind. The memories, the hopes, the dreams we had shared, the way he had looked at me, the way we used to plan our future together. Now, those plans felt like they belonged to someone else. I couldn't even think about our past without feeling a sharp pang of grief. It was like being trapped in a memory that kept replaying itself over and over again. The first time we met, the first time we kissed, the way he held me when I was scared or sad. All of it had been real. All of it had meant something once. But now it felt like a lie. And the worst part was that I couldn't escape it. I couldn't get away from the feeling that I had somehow failed to see the cracks before they broke everything, failed to protect Peyton from the devastation that was Troy's betrayal. I didn't want to talk to anyone, not Brianna, not Johan, not even Thomas. Everyone was either too sympathetic or too distant. Everyone had their own way of dealing with Troy's choices. Some were angry, some were sad, but no one understood the depth of what I was feeling. No one could see the parts of myself that were still tied to him, still broken by him. I spent most of that day alone in the house, drifting between the living room and Peyton's room, doing anything to keep myself occupied. But the quiet only made it worse. I hadn't cried in days, not real tears. The few times I had let myself break down, it felt like I was drowning in grief, like I couldn't breathe through it. And then, around 3 p.m., I got a text. It was from Brianna, and her message stopped me cold. "Emily, I think you need to know something." My heart skipped in my chest as I read it. The message was short, but there was something about it that made the air around me feel heavier. She had heard from Troy. He'd called her that morning, asking for money. He told her he was in trouble and that his credit cards were maxed out. She said she'd asked him about Bailey. He'd told her that Bailey had left him and that he was trying to figure out his life. The image of Troy asking for money, asking for help, felt like a punch in the gut. Was he trying to come back into our lives? Was he trying to manipulate me again? Brianna's message was blunt, as if she could sense the depth of what I was feeling. "He's not coming back, Emily. He's just trying to use us." I didn't know if I believed that. I didn't know what to believe anymore. But one thing was certain. I didn't want to be part of his game. I didn't want to be anyone's second choice. I didn't want to play the role of the forgiving wife, the one who would take him back when he decided he was done running. But then Brianna added something else that made my heart stop. She said that Troy had told her he was thinking about everything, that he regretted leaving, that he was sorry for everything. The words were familiar, too familiar. It was the same thing he had said when he left, the same thing he had said when he came back to try and fix things. And I realized something then. Troy wasn't trying to fix anything. He was trying to erase his guilt. He wanted to feel like the good guy again. He wanted to make himself feel better about the wreckage he had caused. But I wasn't going to let him. The silence in the house felt deafening as I sat there, reading Brianna's message over and over. My hands were shaking as I put my phone down. I had to stop this. I had to stop him from continuing to pull me back into his chaos. I couldn't keep waiting for a man who didn't even understand what he had left behind. I couldn't keep living with the idea that maybe, just maybe, he'd come back and fix it all. I had already spent too much of my life waiting for him to make things right. It was time to stop waiting. I needed to start living for myself again. The moment of clarity came when I least expected it. I had been sitting in the living room, Peyton nestled against me on the couch, watching a movie. She was engrossed in her favorite animated film, her face lit by the flickering images on the screen. I kept glancing at her, my heart aching with a deep, protective love, and yet the emptiness inside me didn't go away. Troy's absence, the betrayal, everything he'd taken with him, it felt like a weight I couldn't shake. And yet, as I sat there holding Peyton close, I realized something important. I couldn't let my life, our life, be defined by what Troy had done. It wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't about waiting for him to come back, or even wondering if I could forgive him. It was about me. It was about Peyton. And it was about us figuring out how to move forward without him. I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep holding on to the person Troy once was, the man I had loved. That person no longer existed. What was left was a stranger, someone who had chosen himself over his family, who had decided that his happiness was more important than the stability of his daughter, his wife, and everything they had worked for. But even as I began to embrace that reality, something inside me still resisted. It wasn't just about Troy anymore. It was about everything I had given up for him. The years I had poured into this marriage, the hopes, the dreams, the future I had planned. It felt like I had been living someone else's life, following a script I didn't write. And then the phone call came. It was Thomas. I hadn't heard from him in days, and honestly, I hadn't expected to. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure what our relationship would look like going forward. He had been the one person in the family who hadn't tried to fix anything or force any kind of reconciliation. He'd just quietly been there, helping, checking in, supporting me without asking for anything in return. When I answered, his voice was steady, but I could tell something was different. "Hey, Emily," he said. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." I was quiet for a moment. I didn't know how to answer. How could I explain what I was feeling? The hurt, the anger, the fear. How could I tell him that I was struggling to hold it all together, that every day felt like a battle? "I'm managing," I said finally, my voice more exhausted than I'd intended. There was a pause, and then Thomas spoke again, his tone softer. "I don't think you know how strong you are. I've been watching you, and I want you to know you're doing better than you give yourself credit for." His words hit me in a way I didn't expect. I had been running on autopilot for so long, just trying to survive each day, that I hadn't even stopped to consider how much strength it had taken to get this far. "You've been through a lot, and you haven't fallen apart. You're still standing, and that counts for something, Emily." His words cut through the fog I'd been living in. It was like I had been waiting for someone to see me, really see me, and finally, someone had. Someone who didn't see the shattered pieces of my marriage, but saw me, someone who was fighting to rebuild, fighting for her daughter, fighting to start over. And that's when I realized it was time to stop being afraid. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was choosing to live. "I need to make a change, Thomas," I said, my voice steady now. "For Peyton, for me. I can't keep letting Troy's decisions define us. I can't keep waiting for a man who's already chosen to walk away. I need to build a life for myself, not one that's based on the remnants of what Troy left behind." Thomas was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him taking in my words. He knew this was a turning point for me. He knew this was the moment I was finally ready to let go. "I'll help however I can," he said. "You know I've got your back. You don't have to do this alone." I exhaled, a long breath that felt like it had been held for far too long. "I know," I said quietly, "and I'm ready. I'm ready to let go of the past and start something new." We talked for a little longer, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. I realized, in that moment, how much I had been holding back, how much I had been afraid to take the next step, but I was done being afraid. I was done waiting for permission to start over. I was done giving Troy the power to dictate my future. This was my life, my story, and I wasn't going to let it be written by anyone else anymore.